All right, ladies and gentlemen, moving on to our next session. This is what I wondering also sometimes. Our next session will be a fireside chat on food gems born, can blockchain and deep tech spy on your dish? I believe some of you might wondering about this. On this session, we do have Mr. Ziga Drill, co-founder and chief operation officer from Origin Trail. He's going to join us today. Moreover, we do have Miss Annex Lynch, who is going to join us again on the session. And we also have Martin Kostrom, founder and CEO from Moonwell, who's going to join us on this stage. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please put your hands together to welcome our two speakers. Thank you very much.
All right, everyone. I'm moderating this session about blockchain and food tech. And with us today we have Siga, who is the CEO of Origin Trail, very exciting company from Europe. And would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, hello everybody. First of all, thank you organizers for having me here. I'm coming from one of the most watery countries in the world called Slovenia. It's in the middle of Europe. It's an only 2 million nation. And another interesting fact is that we have the highest number of blockchain projects per capita in the world. I imagine all of you, tech enthusiasts have stumbled upon this word blockchain. And I was wondering if any of you is trading cryptocurrencies. You can admit there are no regulators here. Yeah. So a few of you. So the tech that is underpinning cryptocurrencies can very interestingly be used also to track food, of course, with integrity. And throughout our kind of work with food supply chains, which started off back in 2011, when we co-founders, the three co-founders, two of us from Slovenia and the third one from Serbia, have launched the first rudimentary system enabling organic food producers to differentiate themselves from competition by revealing more about the provenance of food they're providing. And in 2014, we launched Origin Trail, which was back then a centralist solution. It allowed consumers to see the exact provenance of ingredients for every batch of products. So we would get connected to manufacturers, we would receive files from their IT systems on a daily basis, and using very much central database, we were able to show the exact provenance of ingredients to end consumers. So they would scan a product, input expiry date, LOT number, and voila, they would see which farmers provided milk, poultry, or produce for that particular product. Now, the most common question back then that we received from consumers, from industry stakeholders was, how can we trust the data that you're providing us with? How can we trust the information that you're displaying? And we took this kind of question and their considerations to our hearts. And we used blockchain, more specifically Ethereum public network, to put fingerprints of the data of the files that we received, and in that way we demonstrated the immutability of the hashes. If anything happened with the files, of course, the fingerprints would not correspond the fingerprints on the Ethereum network. However, since 2016, we saw that, especially for food items, blockchain can be very costly. You can imagine if you know anything about the Ethereum network, it's clunky. It is kind of, I still see it as the most advanced public blockchain network to date. However, when we launched our ICOs, and if you heard about CryptoKitties, every such project might clog the network. So we have an issue of scalability, and at the same time we have issue of cost. Never mind all the problems that exist in food supply chain. So are stakeholders willing to share data across the supply chain? Now that's problem number 2. And problem number 3 is that blockchain is still a garbage in, garbage out system. And if you don't have quality data, you might as well use the most perfect blockchain solution, but you're not going to get anything out of this technology. So in this year, we did a major capital raise of $22.5 million to build a protocol that is built on top of the blockchain and offers IT companies and companies in supply chains, not only in food supply chains, to build their applications and support their traceability programs, support their brand protection projects by blockchain backbone, and of course doing it in a cost-efficient and scalable way. So that's a very brief description. I could go into the lengths.
All right. It sounds that to summarize, what you're doing is supply chain management for food, and with blockchain as a way to prove the validity of your documents.
Yeah, correct. And since the protocol that we are launching now, the testnet is going to be up and running in less than a week. It's a very base layer technology. It can be used also in other sectors. We are using it in trade finance. We are also using it for laboratories. So we have a partnership with a Vietnamese laboratory and Australian laboratory, and they're putting the lab results onto our decentralized network. And in that way, they are showing and proving to the industry stakeholders, to the governments, and to consumers that lab tests have actually been performed. Since it's a huge problem, I'm not sure how is it like in Thailand, but in Vietnam, it's a huge problem that laboratories, they would award certificates even without performing lab tests. So we have a huge problem with kind of accountability in this area.
So what are some of the problems that you've encountered in the development of this technology?
So beside the problem that I mentioned, so scalability, cost considerations, there is also companies are afraid to share data amongst themselves, to exchange data files, mainly because they are afraid they might lose competitive advantage if they do so. And we also took this consideration to our heart, and that's why we're kind of offering different levels of encrypting the data that's being shared. We are actually the first company that has used the zero-knowledge proof. It's a technology that was used in Zcash, cryptocurrency, and it allows you to prove a certain statement in a supply chain even without sharing all the underlying data and information which might hurt your competitive advantage.
So do I understand correctly that you moved away from Ethereum as your public blockchain, or are you still at Ethereum blockchain?
We are still heavily based on Ethereum, although in order to ensure that the bulk of the data cannot be changed, that it's immutable, we are using our own protocol, our own decentralized network, which has a limited scalability factor. It's unlike a public blockchain, whereby you would record the data throughout the entire network of, let's say, 10,000 computers, and you would record it there forever. Basically, in the case of our decentralized network, we have a limited replication factor of 2n+1, which basically allows us to prevent the collusion amongst the partners in the supply chain. Should they decide to change anything in the decentralized database, they are unable to do so because the database is being replicated on the computers that are external to their supply chains. So this is kind of an upgrade to what public blockchain has to offer. And public blockchain, unfortunately, is not yet ready to be used in supply chains, especially not in food supply chains on a standalone basis.
Do you include logistics in your concept of supply chain? Do you prove the actual geography of the shipments made through the supply chain?
You need to use several measures in order to do that. We're focusing a lot on using using GS1 standards in order to ensure the interoperability between the files that are exchanged. And if a supplier and buyer exchange data through our protocol, the protocol itself would perform a so-called consensus check. And if both parties agree as to the certain quality of a product or its location, then we can establish that certain product that certain event has actually transpired. However, this is not enough for us to be 100% sure that the product is quality, that the product is really coming from a certain region. And for that reason, as I mentioned, we're also partnering with laboratories because they have forensics methodologies such as mass spectrometry, And by using that kind of technology, you're able to prove provenance at the scientific level. So it's a very collaborative approach that we're kind of facilitating. And right now we have just launched a so-called Trace Alliance, which is allowing both startups ranging from food supply chains all the way to trade finance to utilize our protocol. And by doing that, they're actually gaining basically the quickest way to start using blockchain for their projects. And at the same time, they're gaining exposure, since we already have some 200 companies using the protocol. And the Trace Alliance is getting full of companies, from bigger ones working directly with this, companies such as Unilever, Coca-Cola, to a smaller startup companies that are actually offering kind of niche products, but promising products that might scale up really quickly. So if anyone is interested in joining the Trace Alliance, visit our website, origintrail.io, and learn more.
All right. And you mentioned as a barrier to entry into the market, initially companies were unwilling to share documents publicly, which you address by providing different levels of privacy. And so, what other barriers have you seen to market entry for blockchain-based supply chain?
It's an organizational barrier. So companies that would like to use blockchain, they have. There was a research done just recently which showed that 60% of executives claim that they would like to use blockchain for their operations in whatever shape or form. But the problem is, when executives come to us, they don't have any idea as to what blockchain can be used for and what it cannot be used for. So we need to work a lot on education. And in the second phase, when we consult them, we actually look into their existing business model, because if you want to implement any kind of decentralized solutions, you need to be mindful of the business model of each respective company. And then only in the third phase we start working on implementations, which is, I mean, from this kind of three layer perspective. The technology is the least difficult part. It's the organizational part that takes a lot of, it's very time consuming for us to educate companies. So before the implementation starts, I believe we spend some 90% of time on educating companies and then consulting them on their, how they can use blockchain for their specific use cases.
So what about regulatory hurdles? Are there any governments that want to interfere with what you're trying to achieve?
Governments are generally very supportive of it. We are also becoming a part of the biggest consortium in European Union. It's called Agri-Food Hubs. It's also heavily supported by European Commission. Just recently, this consortium has received 20 million euros to basically to track food and also equip farmers in Europe with different tools in order for them to be more successful on the market. Because if you look at the problem with transparency, food supply chains, it's a kind of a double-edged sword. It's tricky for consumers because they're not sure whether they're consuming safe and authentic food, and at the same time, it's a very bad position for farmers because they might not earn enough for the products they're producing, since less quality products are coming into market. So we actually have a kind of a Russian roulette on both ends. And what is interesting, according to the recent study conducted by Lockton in the UK, approximately 1/3 of executives in food industry would say that they cannot vouch for authenticity of the ingredients they're using.
Wow, that sounds scary. Do you see this as a winner-take-all play where you are aiming to be dominant in the market, or are there then going to be dozens of players doing the same thing and you're going to build interoperability between them?
There are a lot of blockchain initiatives right now, and that's great because none of these initiatives are actually directly competing amongst each other. What they're actually doing, they're breaking the ice for the rest of us. So I'm always very encouraged when I see kind of a fellow blockchain company reaching anything in this arena, because I know it's tough. And whenever something positive happens, it actually moves the entire industry up.
All right. And so what is the current status of your rollout? Are you running pilot projects, or is that still in the future?
Right now we have pilot projects in China, in Vietnam, in Europe, in the US, in different sectors. Supply chain integrity is kind of one of the most important at this point. We're working a lot on logistics, brand protection, and we're also playing around with different use cases in trade finance. And we actually have companies coming to us proposing use cases by themselves, and that's highly encouraging. Right now, we're just about to launch the testnet for the Origin Trail decentralized network. We have established a it's a very loose organization called Trace Alliance, as I already mentioned. And in October, we also have a Trace Alliance Congress, the first Trace Alliance Congress in Slovenia, in Ljubljana. If none of you has been to Slovenia, you should definitely visit it, and at that occasion, come around and say hi. So we're going to bring food safety experts, we're going to bring traceability experts from all around the world, and we're going to discuss how blockchain might help alleviate certain problems in supply chains.
All right, so I'm going to ask one more additional question that I'm curious about, and afterwards we're going to turn to the audience. So try to start thinking about some questions that you want to ask Siga, and let's have a show of hands. But just before that, I'm curious about at what level you see, like in a supply chain, do you trade in at the level of the raw food supplies, or is it at a higher level of more refined food when you're very close to the consumer, or are you covering the entire supply chain from end to end?
Yeah, ideally, would want to cover the entire supply chain. So with our partners from China, Bits and Bytes, we have this year we have revealed the pilot project, the results of the pilot project, whereby we're tracing fresh produce coming up north from Shanghai, and it goes through a distribution channel and then straight to a consumer through their online channel called Imishiji. And this is basically the showcase of the so-called end-to-end transparency, and it allowed us to kind of identify crucial bottlenecks when we try to connect different data sets coming from different partners in the supply chain. So we had some very, very encouraging results, and now we're looking into expanding this use case into furthermore into different supply chains. If you want to use blockchain, you need to have at least two parties on board. You need to have at least a supplier and a buyer of a product. There is no need of blockchain if you're only recording information from your own IT system. Then, central system of storing data might be good enough. But as soon as you have a partner exchanging data with you, then you already stumble upon some credibility issues. In that case, it can be used. So two partners at minimum.
So do you plan to move all the way out to the consumer so that I can be in the store and scan the can of food with my phone and see the origin of the phone from the barcode? Correct.
If you look at our use cases, right now we have a minor pilot project in Slovenia, and we have kind of 10,000 downloads of our application, which allows consumers to see the provenance of ingredients from the partners there, and this is done on a recurring basis. So we actually receive and record data on blockchain and on the protocol on a daily basis, and consumers can actually Slovenian consumers actually the first one who can basically check the where milk is coming from on blockchain.
All right, that's very cool. So let's see from the audience. Raise your hand if you have a question for Siga.
I'm not giving out investment advice.
All right, we have one in the middle. Can we get a mic to him?
I don't get a mic.
All right.
I can shout it out.
Sure.
Yeah, very interesting technology. Siga, how do you solve the problem of once it's a physical origin, and then once you convert it to digital, that's the part where fraud happens, right? So how do you ensure that provenance happens correctly?
Yeah. So on a standalone basis, by using blockchain technology and even our protocol, that's impossible. What you would need, it's a very comprehensive application layer. The first kind of level is we establish a data exchange between partners in the supply chain using certain product visibility standards. It's called EPCIS, and by structuring data in that way, we can do the consensus checks among the partners in the supply chain. And of course, they might agree to kind of feed the system with the wrongful data, but in that case, there is one kind of mechanism. It's because everything is more transparent. They are highly disincentivized to do that. And the second layer, the second kind of application layer we're adding on top of it is the forensics. So the product batches can be inspected by laboratories, and these laboratories have they are enough advanced to show what is the provenance and to verify whether the statement that was previously recorded on our system is actually credible or not. So we need to kind of add additional application layers. However, using only blockchain and protocol, none of this is possible. That's why the approach should be more collaborative.
Yep, but the partners, they have to basically, they're trusted parties essentially, right? So they're a trusted party first, and they join your network, and then they're allowed to. That's the concept?
Not necessarily. They don't need to be trusted. The system is decentralized. Anyone can join the system. However, when you connect two data sets coming from two different organizations, we're still working on this particular issue, but they would do kind of they need to vouch for each other that they're actually doing business. And the bigger the network, the more participants we have in the network, the more credible this evidence that is provided.
That's like a staking mechanism or something, where the
Also,
partners will vote for each other.
So when it comes to recording the data and reimbursing the nodes in the system, we are of course designing a certain staking mechanism whereby data creator and data holder nodes would lose that stake if they try to tamper with the data or if they just shut down their own node.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any other questions? So I can take, while you think 10 more seconds, I can take this opportunity to briefly advertise a session I have tomorrow, 10:30, at the blockchain stage. That will make you go from zero to blockchain expert in 20 minutes. And I don't know if you have any more sessions at Texas this time.
I have a session tomorrow on decentralization. It's going to be a bit more deep dive into blockchain technology.
All right. So thank you very much from us at the Fab stage, and thank you so much to the organizers and Annex.
So, thank you very much, our guest speakers, Ziga and Martin. Thanks for joining us here at the Fab stage.